The email notification chimed on my phone just as I was walking into the Pinnacle Marketing Solutions building that Tuesday morning. Subject line: "Congratulations to our new head of sales, Rachel Thompson." I stopped dead in my tracks right there in the marble lobby, watching early morning commuters rush past me toward the elevators. Rachel Thompson, the woman who had been sleeping with my husband David for the past 6 months. The same Rachel who had smiled at me during company barbecues while secretly destroying my marriage. And now she was being promoted to head of sales, which meant she would have access to everything I had spent 8 years building at this company. I didn't drop my coffee. I didn't gasp or make a scene. Instead, I calmly walked to the elevator bank and pressed the button for the 15th floor, where my office in account management was located. Because what Rachel didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this promotion wasn't going to be the victory lap she thought it was. It was about to become the biggest professional mistake of her entire career. My name is Jessica Miller, and this is the story of how I turned my husband's betrayal into the most satisfying career move I've ever made. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me paint you a picture of who I was before everything changed. At 34, I had built what most people would consider a dream life in Denver, Colorado. I lived in a beautiful 2-story house in Lakewood with my husband David and our 10-year-old daughter Emma. David worked in IT at the same company where I managed major accounts, and we seemed like the perfect corporate power couple to anyone looking from the outside. I had joined Pinnacle Marketing Solutions straight out of college, with my business degree, starting as a junior account coordinator, and working my way up through pure determination and genuine care for my client. Over 8 years, I had built relationships that went far beyond typical vendor-client dynamics. I knew the birthdays of CEOs' children, remembered anniversary dates of family businesses, and had earned trust through consistent delivery and personal attention that money simply couldn't buy. My client portfolio read like a who's who of Denver's business community. Anderson Manufacturing had been my first major win, a family-owned operation that started with just 12 employees and had grown to over 200 under my guidance. Brooks & Associates, a law firm specializing in corporate mergers, had followed me through 3 different service package upgrades because they trusted my strategic insight. Summit Tech Solutions had actually requested me specifically when they were looking to switch marketing firms. Having heard about my reputation through industry networks, these weren't just contracts on paper, these were relationships built on late-night strategy sessions, weekend brainstorming calls, and the kind of personal investment that goes far beyond job description. I had attended their company celebrations, provided shoulders to lean on during tough quarters, and celebrated their victories as if they were my own. My annual performance reviews consistently rated me as exemplary, and my client retention rate was 97% over 8 years. But success at work couldn't fill the growing emptiness I felt at home. David had become increasingly distant over the past year, claiming he was overwhelmed with new IT security protocols at the office. He worked late more frequently, took weekend calls that he insisted were urgent system updates, and seemed distracted even during our family dinners with Emma. When I tried to plan date nights or suggest family outings, he would sigh and mention how exhausted he was from carrying the technical burden of keeping our entire company's systems running smoothly. I told myself it was a phase. Corporate IT was demanding, and David had always been dedicated to his work. When he started going to the gym more often, I thought it was healthy. When he updated his wardrobe with more fitted shirts and expensive cologne, I assumed he was feeling more confident about himself. When he bought a new phone and became protective about leaving it face down during dinner, I pushed away the nagging feeling that something was wrong. The first real crack in my willful ignorance came 4 months ago during the company's annual summer barbecue. David had been talking animatedly with Rachel Thompson near the dessert table, both of them laughing at something on his phone screen. Rachel was 28, originally from Phoenix, and had joined our Denver office 18 months earlier as a junior sales representative. She was attractive in that polished, ambitious way that reminded me of myself when I was younger, with shoulder-length auburn hair and the kind of confident smile that helped her close deals. I had actually liked Rachel when she first started. She was enthusiastic, asked thoughtful questions during team meetings, and seemed genuinely interested in learning from more experienced colleagues. We had grabbed coffee together a few times when she was new, and I had given her advice about navigating office politics and building client relationships. She had thanked me profusely, saying she hoped to build the kind of career I had, and asking if I would consider mentoring her informally. But watching her with David that day, something felt different. There was an intimacy in their body language that made my stomach tighten. They stood closer than necessary, and when Rachel laughed, she touched David's arm in a way that lasted just a beat too long. When I approached them with a plate of potato salad, they both straightened up quickly, and David's cheeks flushed as he mumbled something about Rachel having questions about the new customer database system. I smiled and made small talk, but I filed the interaction away in the back of my mind. Over the following weeks, I started noticing other things. David mentioning Rachel's name more frequently when discussing work, him volunteering to help with projects that weren't technically his responsibility but that would require him to work closely with the sales team, the way his mood improved noticeably when he received certain text messages, and how he had started taking his phone with him even when he went to the bathroom. 2 months ago, my suspicions crystallized into cold certainty. David had left his laptop open on our kitchen counter while he went to pick up Emma from soccer practice. I wasn't snooping. I was simply moving it to plug in my own computer when I saw the message notification pop up on his screen. It was from Rachel, and the preview text was enough to make my hands shake. "Missing you already. Last night was incredible, and I can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore." I stood in our kitchen, staring at those words while the sound of our neighbor's lawnmower hummed through the open window, and Emma's soccer cleats sat muddy by the back door. This was my life, my family, my home, and my husband was planning a future that didn't include me. The betrayal cut deep, but what hurt almost as much was the realization that Rachel had been playing me for months. Every coffee conversation, every piece of advice I had given her, every time I had vouched for her work to other colleagues, she had been using my mentorship while secretly planning to destroy my marriage. But here's where my story diverges from what David and Rachel expected. I didn't confront them. I didn't break down crying, or throw his belongings out on the lawn. Instead, I did something that would prove far more effective. I started planning. Over the past 8 weeks, while David and Rachel thought they were being clever with their secret relationship, I had been methodically preparing for this exact moment. I contacted Patricia Wong, the best divorce attorney in Denver, and retained her services quietly. I opened a separate bank account and began transferring small amounts from our joint savings, not enough to trigger any alerts, but sufficient to ensure I would have resources when the time came. More importantly, I had started having deeper conversations with my key client, not about my personal situation, of course, but about their long-term strategic needs and their satisfaction with Pinnacle's services. I discovered that several of them had been feeling disconnected from the company's leadership and were primarily staying because of their relationship with me personally. Anderson Manufacturing's CEO, Robert Anderson, had even mentioned during a quarterly review meeting that if I ever decided to start my own consulting firm, he would seriously consider moving his business with me. I also began documenting every aspect of my client relationship. I copied contact information, project histories, and strategic plans to my personal laptop. I saved email conversations that demonstrated the depth of trust my clients had in me specifically, not just in Pinnacle as a company. I researched the legal implications of client relationship ownership, and discovered that in Colorado, non-compete clauses had significant limitations, especially for employees who could prove they had built relationships through personal investment rather than company resource. Most crucially, I started exploring opportunities with other firms. Quietly, carefully, I reached out to 3 of Pinnacle's biggest competitors and had preliminary conversations about potential positions. I didn't commit to anything, but I wanted to understand my options and my market value. What I discovered was that my reputation in Denver's marketing community was even stronger than I had realized. 2 firms were willing to make offers sight unseen, and the third wanted to create a new senior position specifically for me. So when I received that email about Rachel's promotion on Tuesday morning, I wasn't devastated. I was ready, because Rachel Thompson was about to learn that stealing someone's husband is one thing, but trying to steal 8 years of professional relationships and career building was quite another. She had no idea that her promotion had just handed me the perfect opportunity to show David, the company, and everyone else exactly what happens when you underestimate Jessica Miller. The elevator dinged as it reached the 15th floor, and I stepped out into the familiar hallway of account management with a calm smile on my face. Rachel's first day as head of sales was about to begin, and she had no idea that it would also be the beginning of the end of her career at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Rachel's first day as head of sales began with the kind of fanfare that Pinnacle Marketing Solutions loved to showcase. By 9:30 that morning, there was already a congratulatory email from the CEO circulating through the company, complete with Rachel's professional headshot and a glowing summary of her 18-month track record. The executive assistant had arranged a bouquet of white lilies on Rachel's new corner office desk, and several colleagues had already stopped by to offer their congratulations. I watched all of this unfold from my office 3 doors down the hall, maintaining my usual professional demeanor while internally cataloging every detail. Rachel wore a navy blue power suit that I recognized as expensive, probably purchased specifically for this occasion. Her auburn hair was styled in a sleek bob that framed her face perfectly, and she carried herself with the confidence of someone who believed she had successfully orchestrated her own destiny. What struck me most was how comfortable she seemed in her new role, as if she had been planning for this moment far longer than anyone realized. She moved through the congratulatory conversations with practiced grace, accepting compliments while making comments about her vision for expanding the sales department's reach. There was no trace of guilt or awkwardness when she spoke with colleagues who knew both David and me, no hint that she was anything other than a dedicated professional who had earned her promotion through merit alone. Around 10:15, Rachel made her way to my office. She knocked twice on the open doorframe before stepping inside, her smile warm and apparently genuine. "Jessica, I wanted to personally thank you for all the guidance you've given me since I started here. I know we'll be working more closely together now, and I'm really looking forward to collaborating between our departments." I looked up from the quarterly report I had been reviewing, and returned her smile with equal warmth. "Congratulations, Rachel. It's a well-deserved promotion. I'm sure you'll do wonderful things with the sales team." The words came out smoothly, professionally, without a hint of the knowledge that was burning beneath the surface. She settled into the chair across from my desk, crossing her legs and leaning forward slightly in that way that successful salespeople do when they want to create intimacy and trust. "I've been thinking about how we can better integrate our department. Your client relationships are really the foundation of what makes this company successful, and I want to make sure the sales team is supporting your work in every way possible." The irony was almost overwhelming. Here was the woman who had been systematically preparing and narrating this story. Took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Destroying my personal life, now sitting in my office talking about professional collaboration and mutual support. She had no idea that I knew about the late-night phone calls with my husband, the weekend hotel meetings, or the messages about their future together. She believed she was speaking to a colleague who respected her professional achievements and had no knowledge of her personal betrayal. "That's a thoughtful approach," I replied, maintaining steady eye contact. "Building strong internal partnerships definitely benefits our clients. They can sense when there's alignment between departments, and it makes them more confident in our overall capability." Rachel nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly, and I've been reviewing the client portfolio, trying to understand the dynamics and relationship histories. Your work with Anderson Manufacturing is particularly impressive. Robert Anderson speaks so highly of you in the client feedback survey." This comment made my pulse quicken, though I kept my expression neutral. Rachel was already studying my client relationships, probably trying to understand how she could leverage them for her own departmental goals. She had no way of knowing that Robert Anderson and I had developed a friendship that extended beyond our professional relationship, or that he had specifically mentioned his concerns about Pinnacle's corporate direction during our last strategy meeting. "Robert is wonderful to work with," I said carefully. "He's been incredibly loyal to our services, and we've been able to help Anderson Manufacturing through some significant growth phases. It's the kind of long-term partnership that really makes this work fulfilling." "I can imagine," Rachel said, and I caught something in her tone that made me study her expression more closely. There was a calculating quality to her enthusiasm, as if she was already mentally cataloging ways to insert herself into relationships I had spent years building. I'm hoping to schedule some joint meetings with our major clients, maybe quarterly check-ins where both departments can present a unified front and explore new opportunities. The audacity was breathtaking. She wanted to position herself as a partner in relationships that existed entirely because of my personal investment and professional dedication. It was the same entitled approach she had taken to my marriage, assuming she could simply step into a life that someone else had built and make it her own. That could be interesting, I replied, keeping my voice thoughtful rather than defensive. Of course, these relationships have developed over many years, and some clients prefer the continuity of working with the same point person, but I'm always open to exploring what might benefit them most. Rachel's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, I understand the importance of continuity. I'm just thinking about scalability and making sure we're maximizing every opportunity. Some of these accounts have potential for significant expansion if we approach them strategically. There it was, the subtle suggestion that my management of these accounts might not be maximizing their potential. It was a classic power play, the kind of thing ambitious people do when they want to take credit for existing success while implying that previous management was somehow lacking. I had seen this approach many times in corporate environments, but never from someone who was simultaneously betraying me personally. Growth is always the goal, I agreed pleasantly, though I've found that these particular clients value relationship depth over aggressive expansion approach. It's taken time to earn their trust, and they tend to respond better to consultative strategies rather than traditional sales pressure. Rachel's eyes flashed with something that might have been irritation, though her smile remained fit. Right. And that's exactly why I think collaboration between our departments could be so powerful. Your relationship foundation, combined with fresh sales perspectives, could really unlock new potential. I nodded as if considering this seriously, while mentally noting how quickly she had moved from wanting to support my work to wanting to reshape it with her fresh perspective. It was becoming clear that Rachel's promotion wasn't just about advancing her own career, but about positioning herself to take control of the client relationships that formed the backbone of my professional value. After Rachel left my office, I sat quietly for several minutes, processing the conversation and its implications. She had essentially announced her intention to insert herself into my client relationships, under the guise of departmental collaboration. It was a strategy that might have worked if she had been dealing with a different kind of person, someone who hadn't spent the past 8 weeks preparing for exactly this scenario. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Robert Anderson's direct number. We had a quarterly strategy meeting scheduled for the following week, but I decided to move that timeline up significantly. Robert, this is Jessica Miller from Pinnacle. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Jessica, always good to hear from you. What's on your mind? I wanted to touch base about some changes happening here at Pinnacle that might affect our partnership. Do you have time for coffee this afternoon? I think it would be beneficial to discuss some strategic considerations in person. Robert's tone shifted to something more serious. That sounds important. How about 3 o'clock at that place we met last month, the one near your office? Perfect. I'll see you then. Similar calls went out to the key contacts at Brooks & Associates and Summit Tech Solutions. I framed each conversation as a proactive client service initiative, wanting to ensure they were informed about organizational changes that might impact their account management. None of them hesitated to make time for these discussions, which reinforced my confidence in the strength of these relationships. The afternoon coffee meeting with Robert Anderson took place at a small cafe 6 blocks from the Pinnacle building. Robert was a man in his early 50s who had built Anderson Manufacturing from a small machine shop into a mid-sized industrial operation through careful planning and genuine care for his employees. He valued loyalty and long-term thinking, qualities that had made our professional relationship so successful. "So what's this about organizational changes?" he asked after we had settled into a corner booth with our drink. I chose my words carefully, sticking to factual information without revealing my personal situation. We've had some significant restructuring in the sales department. Rachel Thompson has been promoted to head of sales, and she's interested in implementing new approaches to client relationship management. Robert's eyebrows rose slightly. New approaches? What kind of changes are we talking about? She's proposing more integrated team approaches, joint departmental meetings with clients, and what she calls fresh sales perspectives on existing relationships. I wanted to make sure you were aware of these potential shifts and get your thoughts on how they might affect your preferences for account management. Robert leaned back in his seat, his expression thoughtful. To be honest, Jessica, one of the main reasons Anderson Manufacturing has stayed with Pinnacle is the consistency and personal attention you've provided. We've worked with other firms where account managers change frequently, or where we get passed around between different departments, and it's always been frustrating. This was exactly the kind of feedback I had hoped to hear, though I kept my response measured. I appreciate that, and I've always valued our working relationship. I'm committed to ensuring that any changes serve your best interests, rather than just internal organizational goals. What's your sense of these new directions? Do you think they'll enhance the service we receive or complicate it? I paused, considering how to answer honestly without appearing to undermine my own company. I think there are potential benefits to increased collaboration, but I also believe that the foundation of our success has been the deep understanding of your business needs that comes from long-term consistent partnership. Any changes should build on that foundation rather than replace it. Robert nodded slowly. That makes sense, and if you felt that organizational changes were interfering with your ability to provide that kind of service, then I would need to seriously consider what would be best for my clients and my own professional integrity. We spent another hour discussing Anderson Manufacturing's upcoming projects and strategic goals. By the end of the conversation, I had a clear sense that Robert's loyalty was to me personally rather than to Pinnacle as an institution. He valued the time I had invested in understanding his business, the strategic insights I had provided during challenging periods, and the personal attention that had made him feel like a priority rather than just another account. The meetings with Brooks & Associates and Summit Tech Solutions that evening yielded similar results. Both organizations expressed appreciation for the heads-up about potential changes, and made it clear that their satisfaction with Pinnacle's services was directly tied to their working relationship with me. They had no interest in being managed by committee or having their account strategies developed by people who didn't understand their business cultures and long-term objectives. By the time I returned home that evening, I had confirmed what I had suspected for months. My client relationships were portable, built on personal trust and professional competence, rather than company loyalty. Rachel's promotion had given her access to the organizational structure and client contact information, but she had no claim to the actual relationships themselves. David was already home when I walked through the front door, sitting at the kitchen table with his laptop open and his phone beside him. He looked up as I entered, his expression carefully neutral in that way that had become familiar over the past several months. "How was your day?" he asked, the question carrying none of the genuine interest it once had. "Interesting," I replied, setting my purse on the counter and moving to the refrigerator to pour myself a glass of wine. "Rachel Thompson got promoted to head of sales today." David's fingers paused over his keyboard for just a moment before resuming their typing. "Oh, that's nice for her. She seemed really dedicated to her work." The casual tone of his response was almost insulting. Here was a man who had been having an affair with this woman for months, and he was discussing her promotion as if she were merely a casual acquaintance he occasionally encountered in the office break room. The deception was so practiced, so effortless, that I wondered how many other lies he had told with the same convincing indifference. "She stopped by my office to talk about departmental collaboration," I continued, watching his face for any reaction. "She's interested in taking a more integrated approach to client relationship management." This time David did look up, though his expression remained carefully controlled. "That sounds like it could be good for the company. More coordination between departments usually helps with efficiency." I took a sip of wine and leaned against the kitchen counter, studying my husband's profile as he returned his attention to his laptop screen. This man who had shared my bed for 12 years, who had helped me paint Emma's nursery and celebrated my professional victories, was now discussing his affair partner's career advancement, as if it were a matter of purely academic interest. "We'll see how it works out," I said finally. "Change can be challenging, especially when it involves relationships that took years to build." David nodded absently, already absorbed in whatever he was typing. I wondered if he was messaging Rachel, sharing details about our conversation, or making plans for another secret meeting. The thought should have made me angry, but instead I felt a strange sense of calm satisfaction. They had no idea how completely they had underestimated me, and they were about to learn that some relationships are much stronger than they appear from the outside. Emma came bounding into the kitchen at that moment, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her soccer cleats dangling from her other hand. "Mom, can I have a snack? Practice made me starving." "Of course, sweetheart," I said, moving to the pantry to find something suitable. As I handed her a granola bar and a juice box, I made a mental note to ensure that whatever happened in the coming weeks, Emma would be protected from the adult drama that was about to unfold. She deserved stability and security, regardless of what her father had chosen to do with his marriage. The evening proceeded with the kind of mundane domesticity that had characterized our family life for months. David remained absorbed in his laptop, Emma completed her homework at the kitchen table, and I prepared dinner while mentally reviewing the day's conversations and planning my next move. To any observer, we would have looked like a typical suburban family going through their evening routine, but beneath the surface, everything was shifting. Rachel's promotion had accelerated the timeline for decisions I had been contemplating for weeks. The conversations with my clients had confirmed that my professional relationships were strong enough to survive organizational changes, and my personal preparation had given me the resources to act independently rather than reactive. As I tucked Emma into bed that night, listening to her chatter about her friends and her upcoming school project, I felt a deep sense of resolve settling over me. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities, but I was ready for whatever came next. Rachel Thompson thought she had gained power and control with her promotion, but she was about to discover that real power comes from preparation, patience, and the kind of professional relationships that can't be stolen or copied. David was already asleep when I finally went to bed, his phone charging on the nightstand and his expression peaceful in the way that comes from believing your secrets are safe. I lay awake for a while staring at the ceiling and thinking about the conversation I would have with Patricia Wong in the morning, the follow-up meetings I would schedule with my clients, and the phone calls I would make to the competing firms who had expressed interest in my services. Rachel's first day as head of sales was ending, but her real education was just beginning. The morning after Rachel's first day as head of sales, I arrived at the office 30 minutes earlier than usual. The building was quiet, with only the security guards and a few dedicated early arrivals populating the marble lobby. I used this time to make several important phone calls from my office, starting with Patricia Wong, my attorney. "Jessica, good to hear from you. How are things progressing?" "The timeline has moved up," I said, settling into my desk chair and pulling out the folder of documents I had been carefully assembling. "David's affair partner just got promoted to head of sales at my company, and she's already making moves to insert herself into my client relationship." Patricia's tone sharpened with professional interest. "That creates some additional complications, but also some opportunities." "Are we talking about potential interference with your livelihood?" "Exactly. She's positioning it as departmental collaboration, but her real agenda is gaining control over relationships I've spent 8 years building. I need to accelerate our timeline." "I can file the divorce papers by the end of this week. Given the evidence we've compiled and the potential professional conflicts, we should be able to establish a strong case for spousal misconduct affecting your career prospects." I felt a surge of satisfaction at hearing those words. While David and Rachel thought they were cleverly managing their secret relationship, I had been building a legal framework that would ensure their betrayal had real consequences. "What about the financial aspects? The separate account you've been funding is secure, and since the house is in both names, we can argue for your primary custody of the residence based on Emma's school district and stability needs. David's affair provides grounds for a favorable asset division." After finishing the call with Patricia, I reached out to Marcus Chen, the senior partner at Denver Strategic Marketing, one of Pinnacle's main competitors. Marcus and I had maintained a professional friendship for several years, occasionally crossing paths at industry events and maintaining mutual respect despite working for competing firms. "Jessica, this is a pleasant surprise. What can I do for you?" "Marcus, I'm exploring some career options and wondered if you might have time for a confidential conversation about potential opportunities at Denver Strategic." There was a pause, and I could almost hear his interest peaking. "Are you considering a move? That would be quite a catch for us. When would you like to meet? How about lunch today? Somewhere discreet, away from the downtown business district." "Perfect. I know just the place." The call with Marcus was followed by similar conversations with contacts at two other firms. By 8:30, I had scheduled 3 separate lunch meetings over the next 4 days, each with senior executives who had the authority to make immediate hiring decisions. I wasn't just exploring options anymore, I was actively creating leverage. Rachel arrived at the office around 9, her confidence from the previous day still evident in her stride and the way she greeted colleagues in the hallway. She was wearing a burgundy blazer that complemented her auburn hair, and she carried herself with the assurance of someone who believed she had successfully positioned herself for career advancement. Around 10:15, she appeared at my office door again, this time carrying a tablet and what appeared to be a strategic planning document. "Jessica, do you have a few minutes? I've been working on some preliminary ideas for client relationship enhancement, and I'd love to get your input." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, curious to see exactly how she planned to approach what she clearly saw as an opportunity to expand her influence. "Of course, I'm always interested in initiatives that could benefit our client." Rachel settled into the chair and opened her tablet, her fingers swiping across the screen with practiced efficiency. "I've been analyzing our major accounts and identifying opportunities for revenue expansion through strategic sales integration. For example, Anderson Manufacturing has been utilizing our core marketing services for years, but they've never been presented with our premium consulting packages or our new digital transformation service." I kept my expression neutral while internally noting the presumptuous tone of her analysis. Rachel was discussing my longest-standing client relationship as if it were simply a matter of inadequate sales technique, rather than careful relationship management, based on deep understanding of the client's needs and preferences. "Robert Anderson and I have discussed various service options over the years," I replied carefully. "Anderson Manufacturing tends to prefer gradual, well-tested approaches rather than comprehensive package overhauls. They value consistency and proven results." Rachel's smile tightened slightly, the same expression I had noticed the day before when her suggestions met with anything less than immediate enthusiasm. "That's exactly why I think a fresh perspective could be valuable. Sometimes clients don't know what they need until it's presented effectively. With the right sales approach, we could probably double their annual spending with us." The audacity was breathtaking. She was essentially suggesting that my 8-year relationship with Robert Anderson had been professionally inadequate because I hadn't pushed him toward more expensive service packages. It was the kind of short-sighted thinking that prioritized immediate revenue over long-term partnership sustainability. "Robert is pretty sophisticated about his business needs," I said, maintaining a diplomatic tone. "He's built Anderson Manufacturing through careful decision-making and strategic partnerships. When he's ready to expand his marketing investment, he tends to research thoroughly and move deliberately." "Right, but that's where skilled sales intervention can be really valuable," Rachel continued, apparently missing or ignoring the subtle warning in my response. "I've seen this pattern with traditional clients who get comfortable with basic service level. They need someone to help them envision bigger possibilities." I leaned back in my chair, studying Rachel's expression as she outlined her vision for transforming my client relationships into higher revenue opportunities. She was revealing more about her fundamental approach to business than she probably realized, and none of it suggested the kind of long-term thinking that had made my client relationships so successful. "What kind of timeline are you thinking for these initiatives?" I asked. "I'd like to start implementing within the next few weeks. We could begin with joint client meetings where I can assess the sales potential and you can provide the relationship continuity. Then gradually transition to more sales-focused presentations as clients become comfortable with the new approach." There it was, the complete plan laid out with stunning clarity. Rachel wanted to use my relationships as a foundation for her own sales initiatives, gradually positioning herself as the primary client contact, while relegating me to a supporting role. It was exactly the kind of corporate maneuvering that ambitious people use to appropriate other people's work and claim credit for existing success. "That's an interesting approach," I said non-committally. "Of course, any changes to established client relationships would need to be handled very carefully. These partnerships represent significant long-term value, and we wouldn't want to risk disrupting them with approaches that might seem too aggressive or sales-focused. Rachel's eyes flashed with something that might have been irritation, though she maintained her professional smile. Of course, client satisfaction is always the priority, but I think you might be underestimating how receptive they could be to expansion opportunities if they're presented with the right strategic framework. I nodded as if considering this perspective seriously, while mentally cataloging every aspect of her proposal for future reference. Rachel was essentially announcing her intention to commoditize relationships I had built through years of personal investment and careful attention to client needs. She had no understanding of the deeper dynamics that made these partnerships successful, and she was about to learn that client loyalty isn't transferable through organizational restructuring. After Rachel left my office, I spent several minutes reviewing the notes I had taken during our conversation. Her approach was textbook corporate ambition, the kind of strategy that looks impressive in PowerPoint presentations, but fails dramatically when applied to real human relationships. She was treating my clients like accounts to be optimized rather than partners to be served. The lunch meeting with Marcus Chen took place at a small Italian restaurant in a suburb 20 minutes from downtown Denver. Marcus had chosen well, selecting a location where we were unlikely to encounter colleagues from either of our companies. He was a man in his late 40s with graying temples and the kind of calm confidence that comes from years of successful business development. "So tell me what's prompting this conversation," he said after we had ordered and settled into a corner booth that provided privacy for our discussion. I had prepared carefully for this moment, crafting an explanation that was truthful without revealing too many personal details. "I'm facing some organizational changes at Pinnacle that are affecting my ability to serve my clients in the way I think they deserve. There's a new sales leadership approach that prioritizes revenue maximization over relationship depth, and I'm concerned about the long-term impact on client satisfaction." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "That's a common tension in our industry. Short-term revenue pressure versus sustainable partnership building. What kind of changes are we talking about?" "Joint departmental management of major accounts, pressure to push premium service packages regardless of client readiness, and a general shift toward treating clients as sales opportunities rather than strategic partners. And you're feeling like your professional values are in conflict with the new direction."
Exactly.
"I've built my career on the principle that client success drives our success, and I'm not comfortable with approaches that prioritize our revenue over their genuine needs." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his expression indicating serious interest. "Jessica, your reputation in this market is exceptional. The kind of client relationships you've built are exactly what we value at Denver Strategic. If you were interested in making a move, we would absolutely want to have that conversation." This was the response I had hoped for, though I maintained a measured tone. "What would that look like hypothetically?" "Senior account director position, 15% salary increase from whatever you're making now, and a client relationship transition package that would help ensure continuity for any accounts that wanted to move with you. We believe in supporting our senior people when they bring valuable partnerships to the firm." The conversation continued for another hour, with Marcus outlining Denver Strategic's approach to client service, their organizational culture, and their commitment to long-term relationship building. By the end of lunch, I had a clear understanding that I would have significant support if I decided to make a career change, and that several of my major clients would likely be welcomed enthusiastically. The afternoon brought a similar meeting with Sarah Rodriguez, the managing partner at Mile High Marketing Solutions. Sarah was a woman in her early 50s, who had built her firm through exactly the kind of relationship-focused approach that I value. She offered an even more attractive package, including equity participation and the opportunity to build my own client services team. By evening, I had confirmation that my professional options were stronger than I had anticipated. 3 different firms were interested in bringing me on board, and all of them understood that my value lay in the client relationships I had cultivated, rather than just my individual skill. More importantly, they all supported the idea of maintaining those relationships even if it meant accepting clients from Pinnacle. When I arrived home that evening, David was in the living room with Emma, helping her with a science project that involved building a model of the solar system. It was the kind of domestic scene that had once filled me with contentment, watching my husband patiently guide our daughter through her homework, while explaining the relative sizes of planets and the concept of orbital distances. Now seeing them together created a complex mix of emotion. David was a good father, patient and engaged with Emma's education and interests, but he was also a man who had chosen to risk his family's stability for a relationship with a woman who was now threatening my professional livelihood. The contradiction was painful to witness. "How was your day?" David asked as I entered the room, his tone carrying the same carefully neutral quality that had become standard in our interactions. "Productive," I replied, settling into the armchair across from where they sat at the coffee table. "I had some interesting conversations about industry trends and market opportunities." David nodded absently, his attention returning to Emma's project. I wondered if he had any idea how dramatically his life was about to change, or if he assumed that I would simply accept the new reality he and Rachel had created, without taking any action to protect myself. Emma looked up from her model, her face bright with the kind of enthusiasm that makes children such engaging companions. "Mom, did you know that Jupiter is so big that all the other planets could fit inside it? That is pretty amazing," I agreed, genuinely smiling at her excitement. "The universe is full of incredible things when you take time to really understand them." As I watched Emma return to her project, carefully positioning tiny painted spheres to represent the planets, I reflected on the metaphor she had unknowingly provided. Sometimes the most important changes happen gradually, with careful positioning and patient planning, until suddenly the entire structure shifts into a new configuration. Rachel and David thought they understood the universe they were operating in, but they had fundamentally miscalculated the forces at work. They had focused on the immediate satisfaction of their secret relationship while failing to consider the larger orbital dynamics that would ultimately determine the outcome of their choices. Tomorrow would bring new developments, including the beginning of legal proceedings that would formalize the end of my marriage, and the initiation of career conversations that would determine my professional future. But tonight, I sat with my daughter and watched her build a model of cosmic relationships, feeling calm and prepared for whatever changes were coming. The phone buzzed with a text message, and I glanced down to see a notification from Patricia Wong confirming our meeting for the following morning to finalize the divorce filing. David didn't notice the message, absorbed as he was in helping Emma calculate the correct distances between her planetary models. I turned the phone face down and returned my attention to my family, knowing that this would be one of the last evenings we would spend together in this configuration. Change was coming, as inevitable as planetary motion, and I was ready to embrace whatever new orbit would emerge from the shifts I had set in motion. The following Thursday morning, I sat in Patricia Wong's downtown office, reviewing the final draft of divorce papers that would officially end my 12-year marriage to David Miller. The documents were comprehensive, detailing not only the dissolution of our personal relationship, but also the professional conflicts that had emerged as a result of David's affair with his colleague. "We've included provisions for potential interference with your livelihood," Patricia explained, pointing to specific clauses in the filing. "Given that Rachel Thompson now has supervisory authority over your department and access to your client relationships, we can argue that David's personal choices have created a hostile work environment that threatens your professional stability." I signed each page with steady hands, feeling a sense of finality that was both sobering and liberating. These weren't just legal documents, they were the formal recognition that my marriage had ended the moment David chose to betray our family for a relationship with a woman who was now positioned to damage my career. "The papers will be served this afternoon," Patricia continued. "Given the circumstances, I recommend having them delivered to David's workplace, rather than your home. It maintains some separation between your personal and professional situations." I nodded, appreciating her strategic thinking. The last thing I wanted was for Emma to witness the moment when David received legal confirmation that his choices had consequences. She deserved to be protected from the adult drama that was about to unfold in earnest. While I was finalizing my divorce proceedings, Rachel was implementing the first phase of her plan to integrate herself into my client relationship. She had scheduled what she called a strategic partnership meeting with Robert Anderson for that afternoon, ostensibly to introduce herself as the new head of sales and explore opportunities for enhanced collaboration between our departments. What Rachel didn't know was that Robert had called me immediately after receiving her meeting request, expressing confusion about why a sales manager wanted to discuss his account when he had always worked exclusively with account management for strategic planning. "Jessica, I have to say I'm a bit puzzled by this approach," Robert had said during our phone conversation. "My understanding was that Pinnacle's strength lay in the continuity and depth of the account management relationship. This feels like the kind of compartmentalized approach we've seen from other firms, and frankly, it's one of the reasons we've been so satisfied with our current arrangement." I had chosen my words carefully, maintaining professional diplomacy while ensuring that Robert understood the potential implications. "I think Rachel is enthusiastic about contributing to client success, and she may not fully understand the established dynamics that have made our partnership so effective. Feel free to share your preferences for how you like to work with our team." The meeting between Rachel and Robert took place in Pinnacle's main conference room, a space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Denver and a polished table that could seat 12 people comfortably. I wasn't included in the meeting, which was Rachel's choice, but the building's open architecture meant that I could observe some of the dynamics through the glass walls. Rachel had prepared extensively with presentation materials spread across the table and her tablet positioned for what appeared to be a comprehensive overview of expanded service offering. She wore a sharp charcoal suit and had her hair pulled back in a style that projected authority and professionalism. From a distance, she looked every inch the successful sales executive presenting exciting opportunities to a valued client. Robert, however, appeared less engaged than Rachel might have hoped. He sat with his arms crossed, occasionally glancing at the materials she presented but spending more time looking out the window toward the city skyline. His body language suggested polite tolerance rather than genuine interest, the kind of posture that experienced businesspeople adopt when they're fulfilling social obligations rather than participating in productive conversation. The meeting lasted exactly 30 minutes, and I watched Robert shake Rachel's hand with the kind of perfunctory politeness that signals the end of an unsuccessful encounter. Rachel remained in the conference room for several minutes after Robert left, gathering her materials with movements that appeared less confident than when she had entered. 20 minutes later, my phone rang with a call from Robert Anderson. "Jessica, I just wanted to give you a heads up about that meeting with your new sales director. How did it go?" I asked, though his tone already suggested the answer. "Not particularly well, I'm afraid. She seemed to have some fundamental mental misunderstandings about our business model and our strategic priority. She kept pushing premium service packages that don't align with our operational approach, and she seemed surprised when I explained that we prefer gradual, well-tested implementations rather than comprehensive overhauls. I felt a surge of satisfaction, though I kept my voice neutral. "That's unfortunate. Sometimes it takes time for people to understand the nuances of different client relationships. The thing is, Jessica," she kept referring to untapped revenue potential and optimization opportunities as if our current arrangement was somehow inadequate. It made me wonder if Pinnacle's approach to client service is shifting in a direction that might not be compatible with our preference. This was exactly the kind of feedback I had anticipated, and it confirmed that Rachel's aggressive sales approach was likely to backfire with clients who valued relationship depth over revenue maximization. "I hope you don't feel that way about our overall partnership, Rob. Your satisfaction and success have always been my primary focus." "Oh, absolutely not. Our working relationship has been exceptional and I have complete confidence in your understanding of our needs. But this meeting raised some concerns about whether that level of personalized service will continue to be available if Pinnacle is moving toward more sales-focused client management." After the call with Robert, I spent the afternoon fielding similar conversations with contacts at Brooks & Associates and Summit Tech Solutions. Rachel had apparently scheduled meetings with all three of my major clients, and each conversation had gone similarly poorly. Her focus on revenue expansion and premium service upgrades had struck these long-term clients as pushy and tone-deaf, exactly the opposite of the consultative approach they value. By 5 o'clock, I had received confirmation from all three organizations that they were questioning Pinnacle's direction and wondering about alternative options for their marketing services. It was precisely the outcome I had anticipated, though seeing it unfold still felt surreal. At 5:30, David arrived home looking shell-shocked and carrying a manila envelope that I immediately recognized as legal documents. He stood in our entryway for several moments, staring at the papers in his hands as if he couldn't quite process what they represent. "Jessica," he called out, his voice carrying a tone I hadn't heard in months. "We need to talk." I emerged from the kitchen where I had been preparing dinner, wiping my hands on a dish towel and maintaining the calm composure that had served me so well throughout this entire process. "What's on your mind, David?" He held up the divorce papers, his face pale and his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. "What is this? You filed for divorce without even discussing it with me?" The question was so absurd that I almost laughed. "Discussing it with you? David, you've been having an affair for 6 months. You've been planning a future with another woman. What exactly did you think we were going to discuss?" He moved into the living room and sank onto the couch, the papers scattered across the coffee table where Emma had been working on her science project the night before. "I didn't know you knew. I mean, I thought maybe you suspected, but I didn't realize you had actual proof." "I've known for months," I said, settling into the armchair across from him. "I've been watching you lie to me every day while you built a relationship with Rachel Thompson. Did you really think you were being subtle?" David's hands shook slightly as he picked up one of the legal documents, scanning the text with the kind of desperate attention that comes from hoping the words might somehow mean something different upon closer examination. "This says you're claiming professional interference and hostile work environment. What does that mean?" "It means that your girlfriend just got promoted to a position where she has authority over my career and access to my client relationship. It means that your personal choices have created professional conflicts that threaten my livelihood." He looked up at me with an expression of genuine confusion, as if he had never considered that his affair might have implications beyond his personal satisfaction. "But Rachel would never do anything to hurt your career. She's always spoken highly of your work." The naivety was breathtaking. "David, Rachel spent this afternoon meeting with my 3 biggest clients, trying to convince them to upgrade to premium service packages and suggesting that their current account management was somehow inadequate. She's systematically trying to insert herself into relationships I've spent 8 years building." David's face went pale as the implications began to sink in. "She said she was just trying to support departmental collaboration. She told me she wanted to help your clients access more service." "She told you?" I leaned forward, studying his expression. "You discussed my clients with your affair partner?" The realization of what he had revealed hit him immediately and he began backtracking frantically. "Not indeed. She just mentioned that she thought there were opportunities to better serve some of the major accounts." I stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked our backyard, where Emma's swing set stood silhouetted against the evening sky. "So while you were sleeping with Rachel, she was pumping you for information about my work and my client relationships, and you provided it, thinking you were helping her career advancement." "It wasn't like that," David protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "She never asked specific questions. We just talked about work sometimes, like any couple would." "Like any couple would," I repeated, turning back to face him. "Except we're a couple, David. You and I are married, you and Rachel are having an affair." The silence stretched between us, filled with the weight of months of deception and betrayal, finally being acknowledged openly. David sat with his head in his hands, the divorce papers spread around him like evidence of choices he could no longer deny or minimize. "Jessica, I know I made mistakes, but divorce seems so extreme. Can't we work through this? Can't we try counseling or something?" I returned to my chair, studying the man I had loved for over a decade and seeing clearly how little he understood about the magnitude of what he had done. "David, you didn't make mistakes. You made choices. You chose to pursue Rachel. You chose to lie to me every day for months. You chose to share information about my career with a woman who is now using it to try to damage my professional relationship." "But I love you," he said, the words coming out with desperate sincerity. "I know I've been confused and stupid, but I don't want to lose our family." "You should have thought about that before you started planning a future with my colleague," I replied calmly. "And you should have thought about it before you helped her gain access to information she could use against me professionally." David picked up another document from the coffee table, scanning the financial disclosures and asset division proposal. "This says you want primary custody of the house and Emma.
You can't just take my daughter away from me. I'm not taking Emma away from you. You'll have visitation rights and the opportunity to maintain a relationship with her. But she needs stability and she needs to stay in her school district with her friends and her routine. He continued reading, his expression growing increasingly panicked as he absorbed the implications of the legal proceedings. You moved money out of our joint account. You've been planning this for months. I've been protecting myself and our daughter from the consequences of your choices, I corrected. While you were focused on your affair, I was ensuring that Emma and I would have financial security regardless of what you decided to do with your marriage. At that moment, Emma came bounding through the front door, her backpack slung over her shoulder and her face bright with the kind of enthusiasm that 10-year-olds bring to everyday experiences. She stopped short when she saw the tension in the living room, her expression shifting to concern as she looked between David and me. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I moved quickly to her side, wrapping her in a reassuring hug. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Daddy and I are just discussing some grown-up things. Why don't you go wash up for dinner?" Emma nodded, but continued looking between us with the kind of perceptive awareness that children develop when they sense adult stress. After she disappeared upstairs, David turned to me with pleading eyes. "She doesn't need to go through this. We can figure out a way to work things out without putting her through a divorce." "You're right," I agreed. "She doesn't need to go through this, but you created this situation, Dave. You chose to risk our family's stability for an affair with a woman who is now threatening my career. These are the consequences of your choices." The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing with a call from Marcus Chen at Denver Strategic Marketing. I glanced at David, then decided to answer the call right there in the living room. "Marcus, thanks for calling back. Jessica, I wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday. We've discussed your situation internally and we're prepared to make a formal offer. Senior Account Director position, 20% salary increase, and a signing bonus that would help with any transition costs.
Plus, we're committed to supporting any client relationships that choose to move with you." I met David's stare as I responded to Marcus. "That's a very generous offer. When would you need a decision?" "Take the weekend to consider it, but we're hoping to have you start within the next 2 weeks if you're interested." After I hung up, David stared at me with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. "You're leaving Pinnacle? You're actually going to quit?" "I'm considering all my options," I said calmly. "When your affair partner becomes your wife's supervisor and starts interfering with her client relationships, it creates an untenable work environment. But that's not what Rachel intended. She's just trying to do well in her new position." I looked at David with something approaching pity. "David, Rachel got promoted and immediately tried to take control of my client relationship. She scheduled meetings with my biggest accounts without including me, pushed service packages they didn't want, and created enough concern that all 3 of them called me to express doubts about Pinnacle's direction. Whether she intended it or not, she's effectively forcing me to consider other employment options." The full scope of the situation was finally beginning to dawn on David. His affair hadn't just destroyed our marriage, it had also created professional conflicts that were likely to cost Pinnacle significant client relationships and damage the company's reputation in Denver's marketing community. "What can I do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How can I fix this?" I stood up, gathering the divorce papers and stacking them neatly on the coffee table. "You can sign these documents and make this process as smooth as possible for Emma's sake. You can stop pretending that your choices don't have consequences. And you can start figuring out how you're going to explain to our daughter why her family is falling apart." David buried his face in his hands, finally understanding that his months of deception and betrayal had created a cascade of consequences that couldn't be managed or minimized. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did happen," I replied. "And now we all have to live with the results of your decisions." The following Monday, I submitted my resignation letter to Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, effective in 2 weeks. The letter was professional and diplomatic, citing new opportunities for career growth and expressing gratitude for my years with the company. I didn't mention Rachel's interference or David's affair, maintaining the kind of graceful discretion that would serve me well in Denver's interconnected business community. Within hours of my resignation, all 3 of my major clients had contacted Pinnacle to terminate their contracts, citing concerns about continuity and strategic alignment. Anderson Manufacturing, Brooks & Associates, and Summit Tech Solutions all followed me to Denver Strategic Marketing, bringing nearly 60% of my former department's annual revenue with them. Rachel's first week as head of sales ended with her facing questions from senior management about how the company had lost 3 major accounts immediately following her promotional meetings with those clients. Her vision of integrated departmental collaboration had resulted in the most significant client exodus in Pinnacle's history. David moved out of our house the following weekend, taking his personal belongings and leaving behind 12 years of shared memories and the family he had risked for a relationship that was already showing signs of strain. Rachel discovered that dating a married man who lies to his wife is very different from building a life with a divorced man who faces financial obligations and limited custody of his child. 6 months later, I was thriving at Denver Strategic Marketing, leading a team of account managers and earning recognition as one of Denver's most successful marketing professionals. My client relationships were stronger than ever, built on the foundation of trust and personal investment that no organizational restructuring could replicate. Emma adjusted to the new routine with the resilience that children often display when adults handle difficult situations with honesty and consistency. She spent weekdays with me in our house and alternating weekends with David in his small apartment across town. The stability she needed came from knowing that despite the changes in our family structure, her mother's career and her father's love for her remained constant. Rachel left Pinnacle 3 months after her promotion, unable to recover from the reputation damage caused by the client exodus. She found a position with a smaller firm in Colorado Springs, far enough away to start fresh but close enough for David to maintain their relationship if he chose to do so. David faced the reality that his affair had cost him his marriage, his home, his daily relationship with his daughter, and significant financial resources through divorce settlement and ongoing support obligations. The excitement and validation he had found with Rachel gradually gave way to the practical challenges of rebuilding his life around the consequences of his choices. As for me, I learned that the best response to betrayal isn't always confrontation or revenge. Sometimes it's simply refusing to accept someone else's vision of your worth and building something better on the foundation of relationships you've earned through genuine care and professional excellence. The marriage I thought would last forever ended, but the career I built through dedication and integrity became stronger than ever. And Emma learned through watching how I handled the most difficult period of my life, that strength comes not from avoiding challenges but from facing them with grace, preparation, and unwavering commitment to your own value. 2 years after my divorce from David was finalized, I stood in the conference room of Denver Strategic Marketing's newly expanded downtown office, looking out at the city skyline while my team prepared for our largest client presentation to date. The view from the 23rd floor encompassed the Rocky Mountains to the west and the sprawling metropolitan area that had become the foundation of my professional renaissance. My role as Senior Vice President of Client Relations represented more than just career advancement. It symbolized the complete transformation of my life from a woman whose husband's betrayal had threatened everything she had built into a leader who had turned that crisis into unprecedented success. The corner office with my name on the door wasn't just recognition of my individual achievements, it was validation that building relationships based on genuine value and mutual respect creates something that can't be destroyed by other people's poor choices. The presentation we were preparing for involved a potential partnership with Mountain West Technologies, a Fortune 500 company that was considering consolidating their marketing services with a single Denver-based firm. The contract would be worth $12 million annually and would establish Denver Strategic as one of the premier marketing firms in the Mountain West region. What made this opportunity particularly meaningful was that Mountain West had specifically requested to work with me after hearing about my reputation from Robert Anderson at Anderson Manufacturing. My team consisted of 8 professionals who had either followed me from Pinnacle or been recruited specifically to work under my leadership. Michelle Rodriguez, who had become my closest colleague and friend during the turbulent period of my divorce, now served as account director for our technology sector client. Her loyalty during those difficult months had evolved into a partnership built on shared professional values and mutual respect for each other's expertise. Jessica, the Mountain West executives just confirmed they'll be here at 2 o'clock, Michelle announced, reviewing her tablet with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that made her so effective in client relations. Their CMO specifically mentioned that she's looking forward to understanding our approach to long-term partnership development. I smiled, remembering how different this felt from the aggressive sales tactics that Rachel Thompson had tried to implement at Pinnacle. That's exactly the kind of conversation we excel at. When clients are focused on partnership rather than transactions, we can really demonstrate our value. The past 2 years had taught me that my instincts about relationship-based business development were not only correct but increasingly valuable in a market where companies were tired of being treated as revenue opportunities rather than collaborative partners. Every major client we had won at Denver Strategic had come through referrals from existing relationships, proving that genuine care and consistent delivery created exponential growth opportunity. Emma, now 12 and developing into a confident young woman, had adapted to our new life with the kind of resilience that children demonstrate when the adults around them handle challenges with integrity and transparency. She split her time between my house in Lakewood and David's apartment in Aurora, maintaining relationships with both parents while benefiting from the stability that came from my career success and emotional well-being. "Mom, are you going to win that big contract today?" She had asked that morning over breakfast, her question delivered with the casual confidence that suggested she expected positive outcomes because that's what she had observed over the past 2 years. "We're going to present our best work and let the client decide what's right for their business," I had replied, the same measured approach to expectations that had served me well in both personal and professional contexts. Emma's relationship with David remained loving but had evolved to reflect the new realities of our family structure. She understood, in the way that perceptive children do, that her father had made choices that changed their family, and she had learned to appreciate the stability and success that characterized her life with me. David remained an engaged father during his custody time, but Emma clearly recognized the difference between the chaos that had defined the final months of our marriage and the purposeful progress that had characterized our life since the divorce. The Mountain West presentation began promptly at 2 o'clock with introductions that felt more like the beginning of a strategic partnership than a typical vendor pitch. The client team included their Chief Marketing Officer, Director of Corporate Communications, and VP of Business Development, all of whom had done extensive research on Denver Strategic's approach and my personal track record with major accounts. "Miller, we've heard impressive things about your work with Anderson Manufacturing and Summit Tech Solutions," the CMO began, settling into her chair with the kind of focused attention that indicated serious interest. "What we're really looking for is a partner who understands that marketing success requires deep integration with our business strategy rather than just creative campaigns and media placement." This was exactly the kind of conversation that energized me, the opportunity to discuss marketing as a business discipline rather than a support function. That's precisely how we approach every client relation. Before we even discuss tactics or deliverables, we invest time in understanding your competitive landscape, your internal culture, and your long-term strategic objective. Over the next 90 minutes, my team and I walked the Mountain West executives through case studies that demonstrated our philosophy in action. We showed how our work with Anderson Manufacturing had supported their expansion into new geographic markets, how our partnership with Brooks & Associates had positioned them for a successful merger, and how our collaboration with Summit Tech Solutions had helped them navigate a complete rebranding initiative. What differentiated our presentation from typical agency pitches was the depth of integration we had achieved with these clients. We weren't just providing marketing services, we had become strategic advisors who understood their businesses well enough to anticipate challenges and identify opportunities that purely external vendors would miss. "This level of partnership is exactly what we've been looking for," the VP of Business Development noted, reviewing the detailed strategic frameworks we had developed for our existing clients. Too many firms focus on their own capabilities rather than our business outcome. The meeting concluded with Mountain West requesting a detailed proposal and timeline for a comprehensive partnership that would begin with a 6-month strategic assessment and evolve into ongoing relationship management. As they left our conference room, I felt the satisfaction that comes from knowing your approach to business development has been validated by sophisticated clients who understand the difference between vendors and partners. After the Mountain West team departed, my colleagues and I spent an hour debriefing the presentation and discussing the implications of potentially landing such a significant account. The contract would require expanding our team by at least 6 people and would establish Denver Strategic as a major player in the regional marketing landscape. It's incredible to think about how much has changed since you joined us, Michelle observed as we wrapped up our planning session. When you first left Pinnacle, I don't think any of us could have imagined we'd be competing for contracts this size. Her comment reminded me of the conversation I'd had with Marcus Chen when I first joined Denver Strategic. When he had expressed confidence in my ability to bring valuable client relationships, but couldn't have predicted the exponential growth that would result from building a team around relationship-focused business development. The success of the past 2 years hadn't been just about my individual transition from Pinnacle to Denver Strategic. It had been about proving that an alternative approach to client relations could create competitive advantages that purely sales-focused firms couldn't match. Every major win we had achieved had come through referrals, relationship depth, and the kind of strategic thinking that clients valued more than aggressive pricing or flashy presentation. That evening, as I drove home through the familiar neighborhoods of Lakewood, I reflected on how completely my life had been transformed since the day I received that email about Rachel's promotion. The woman who had once feared that her husband's affair partner might damage her career had become a business leader whose reputation attracted clients from across the region. Emma was waiting for me in the kitchen when I arrived home, her homework spread across the table where David and I had once shared dinners and discussed our days at Pinnacle. She looked up from her math assignment with the kind of bright smile that reminded me daily of why fighting for stability and success had been so important. "How did your big meeting go?" she asked, closing her textbook and giving me her full attention. "Very well," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. "The client seemed really interested in working with us, and we should know more by the end of the week." Emma nodded with the kind of casual confidence that suggested she expected good news, because that's what she had come to associate with her mother's professional life. "Are you happy with how things are going at work?" The question was more perceptive than I might have expected from a 12-year-old, but Emma had been observing the changes in our life for 2 years, and had developed a sophisticated understanding of how professional success contributed to personal well-being. "I'm very happy," I told her honestly. "I feel like I'm doing work that matters with people who respect what I bring to the team. It's the kind of career I always hoped to build." What I didn't tell Emma, because it wasn't appropriate for a child to carry adult insights, was that my career success had been built on the foundation of a personal crisis that had forced me to discover strengths I didn't know I possessed. The betrayal that had once seemed like it might destroy everything I had worked for had instead become the catalyst for achievements that exceeded anything I had accomplished during my marriage. The following Friday, Mountain West Technology is officially awarded the $12 million contract to Denver Strategic Marketing, with specific acknowledgement that their decision had been influenced by confidence in my leadership and the relationship-based approach my team had demonstrated. The announcement made the business section of the Denver Post and established our firm as one of the fastest-growing marketing companies in Colorado. Marcus Chen called me into his office that afternoon to discuss the implications of our success and to outline plans for continued expansion. "Jessica, when we first talked about you joining Denver Strategic, I knew you would bring valuable client relationships, but what you've actually accomplished goes far beyond what any of us anticipated." He gestured toward the window that overlooked downtown Denver, where construction cranes indicated the kind of economic growth that created opportunities for firms like ours. "You've essentially redefined how we approach business development, and you've proven that relationship-focused marketing creates competitive advantages that other firms can't replicate quickly." The conversation evolved into discussions about equity participation, leadership development, and long-term strategic planning for my role within the company. By the time I left Marcus's office,
I had a clear understanding that my professional future was limited only by my own ambitions and my commitment to the relationship-based philosophy that had driven our success. That weekend, Emma and I celebrated the Mountain West contract with dinner at her favorite restaurant, a small Italian place in downtown Lakewood where the owner knew our names and always asked about her school project. As we shared dessert and talked about her upcoming summer plans, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life we had built together. "Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad hadn't made those mistakes?" Emma asked, her question delivered with the kind of thoughtful curiosity that characterized her approach to understanding the world around her. I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest without burdening her with adult complexity. "Sometimes I think about different possibilities, but I'm grateful for the life we have now. The challenges we went through taught us both that we're stronger than we realized, and they led us to opportunities we might never have discovered otherwise." Emma nodded, twirling pasta around her fork with the kind of concentration that suggested she was processing my response. "I think Dad is sadder now than he used to be, but you seem happier." Her observation was perceptive and accurate. David's life had contracted significantly since our divorce, limited by financial obligations, reduced time with Emma, and the recognition that his impulsive choices had cost him a family and lifestyle that he had taken for granted. Meanwhile, my life had expanded in ways that I couldn't have imagined when I was married to him. On Sunday afternoon, David arrived to pick up Emma for his custody weekend, and I observed the interaction with the kind of detached compassion that had replaced the anger and hurt I had felt during the worst periods of our divorce. He looked older than his 42 years, with gray streaks in his hair and a weariness that suggested he was still processing the full implications of his choices. "Jessica, I saw the article about your contract in the Post," he said as Emma gathered her belongings for the weekend. "Congratulations. It sounds like things are going really well for you." His tone carried a mixture of genuine pride and personal regret that made me feel sympathy for the man who had once shared my dreams and aspirations. "Thank you. It's been a lot of hard work but very rewarding." David nodded, glancing around the house that had once been his home and was now clearly established as Emma's and mine. "I hope you know that I'm glad you're doing so well. I know I made things incredibly difficult, and I'm grateful that you were able to build something positive from all of that." The conversation was brief and carefully neutral, but it represented the kind of mature acknowledgement that had gradually replaced the hostility and blame that had characterized our early interactions after the divorce. David had eventually accepted responsibility for his choices and their consequences, while I had found ways to appreciate the strength and opportunities that had emerged from the crisis he had created. As I watched him drive away with Emma that afternoon, I reflected on the complex journey that had brought me from a woman whose husband's betrayal had threatened everything she valued, to a business leader whose success was built on the very relationship skills that her marriage had failed to protect. The irony wasn't lost on me that David's affair with Rachel had ultimately led me to discover professional capabilities and personal resilience that I might never have developed if our marriage had continued in its comfortable but limiting pattern. Monday morning brought news that Rachel Thompson had left her position at the Colorado Springs marketing firm where she had worked since leaving Pinnacle, reportedly to take a role with a company in Phoenix that would allow her to return to her hometown. The information came through industry networks rather than personal communication, but it represented the final chapter in a professional relationship that had once threatened my career and had instead become a catalyst for unprecedented success. Rachel's departure from Colorado meant that the chapter of my life defined by her interference and David's betrayal was truly closed. The woman who had once seemed to pose such a significant threat to my professional stability had become irrelevant to my continued success, while I had built a career and life that exceeded anything I had achieved when I was trying to accommodate their deception. As I sat in my corner office that morning, reviewing plans for the Mountain West partnership and considering proposals for additional team expansion, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment that went beyond professional recognition or financial success. I had transformed the most challenging period of my life into the foundation for achievements that were built on my own values and capabilities, rather than compromises or accommodations to other people's choices. Emma thrived in the stability and confidence that characterized our life together, while David faced the ongoing consequences of sacrificing his family for a relationship that had never provided the fulfillment he had imagined. Rachel had moved on to rebuild her career in a different market, far from the professional relationships she had damaged in Denver. The betrayal that had once seemed like it might destroy everything I had worked for had instead taught me that the most valuable relationships, both personal and professional, are built on foundations strong enough to survive external pressures and internal challenges. The clients who had followed me from Pinnacle to Denver Strategic had done so because they valued the depth and authenticity of our partnerships, while the marriage that I had thought was unshakable had collapsed because it was built on assumptions rather than genuine mutual respect. My story became one that I occasionally shared with other women facing similar challenges, not as a template for revenge, but as evidence that the best response to betrayal is often the patient construction of something better. The career I built after my divorce was stronger than the one I had maintained during my marriage because it was based on my own vision and values, rather than compromises designed to accommodate someone else's limitations. 2 years after receiving that email about Rachel's promotion, I understood that the most powerful form of triumph isn't defeating your enemies, but building a life so successful and fulfilling that their interference becomes irrelevant to your continued growth. Emma learned through watching my response to the most difficult period of our lives that strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from using them as opportunities to discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. 5 years had passed since the day I discovered David's affair with Rachel Thompson, and I found myself standing at the podium of the Colorado Business Women's Association annual conference, preparing to deliver the keynote address to an audience of 300 professional women from across the state. The speech I was about to give wasn't just about business strategy or career development. It was about the transformation that occurs when you refuse to let other people's choices define your future. The ballroom at the Grand Hyatt Denver was filled with women who had built successful careers across every industry imaginable, from technology entrepreneurs to healthcare executives, to financial advisors who managed portfolios worth millions of dollars. What united them wasn't their specific professional achievements, but their shared understanding that success requires both competence and resilience, the ability to excel at your chosen field, while navigating the personal and professional challenges that inevitably arise. My introduction to the audience included accomplishments that would have seemed impossible during those dark months, when I was discovering the extent of David's betrayal. Denver Strategic Marketing had grown from a regional firm to a nationally recognized consultancy with offices in 4 states. Under my leadership as Chief Executive Officer, a position I had assumed 18 months earlier when Marcus Chen decided to focus on strategic partnership. The company had been named one of Fast Company's most innovative companies, and had achieved recognition as one of the best places to work in Colorado. The personal achievements were equally meaningful. Emma, now 17 and preparing for her senior year of high school, had developed into a confident young woman who understood the value of integrity and hard work. She maintained a strong relationship with David, while clearly appreciating the stability and opportunities that characterized her life with me. Her college applications included essays about resilience and leadership that drew inspiration from watching how I had rebuilt our lives after the divorce. As I looked out at the audience of successful women, I thought about the message I wanted to convey about turning personal crisis into professional opportunity. The story I was about to share wasn't just about my own experience, but about the broader principle that the most significant growth often emerges from the most challenging circumstance. Good morning, and thank you for that generous introduction, I began, my voice carrying easily through the ballroom's sophisticated sound system.
I want to start today by talking about a moment that many of you have probably experienced in some form. The moment when you realize that your life is not going according to the plan you had carefully constructed. I paused, making eye contact with women throughout the audience, and recognizing the kind of focused attention that indicates genuine interest in the topic being discussed. 5 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was married to a man I loved, raising a daughter who brought joy to every day, and building a successful career in account management at a respected marketing firm. I had created what looked like the perfect balance between personal fulfillment and professional achievement. The audience listened with the kind of engaged silence that speakers hope for, and I could see recognition in many faces as I described the comfortable assumptions that had defined my life before everything changed. But assumptions, as many of you know, can be dangerous foundations for building a life. The comfortable routines and shared goals that I thought represented a strong marriage were actually masking fundamental problems that I had chosen not to see. When I discovered that my husband was having an affair with a colleague who had just been promoted to a position that gave her authority over my career, I faced a choice that would determine not just my immediate response, but the entire trajectory of my future. I had rehearsed this speech carefully, but standing in front of an audience of accomplished women made the words feel more immediate and personal than they had during practice sessions. These were women who understood the complexity of balancing professional ambition with personal relationships, and many of them had probably faced similar moments of crisis and decision. The conventional wisdom about betrayal suggests that the appropriate response is either forgiveness and reconciliation, or anger and revenge. But I discovered a third option that proved far more powerful than either of those approaches. Instead of focusing on what I had lost or what had been done to me, I chose to focus on what I could build with the strength and knowledge I had gained from the experience. The response from the audience was immediate and positive, with nods of recognition and the kind of forward-leaning body language that indicates deep engagement with the speaker's message. I could see that many of these women had faced their own moments of crisis and were interested in hearing about alternative approaches to handling personal and professional challenges. The affair that threatened to destroy my marriage also created professional conflicts that could have ended my career. My husband's girlfriend had been promoted to head of sales at my company, and she immediately began interfering with client relationships I had spent 8 years building. She scheduled meetings with my biggest accounts, pushed service packages they didn't want, and created enough concern that these long-term clients began questioning their continued partnership with my firm. I took a sip of water and glanced at my notes, though by this point the story was so familiar that I could have told it without any written guidance. The key was maintaining the measured tone that had served me well throughout the original crisis and continued to characterize my approach to leadership and business development. Instead of confronting the situation with emotion or desperation, I chose to approach it with the same strategic thinking I brought to my professional responsibilities. I quietly retained legal counsel, secured my financial position, and began exploring career opportunities with competing firms. More importantly, I had honest conversations with my key clients about their satisfaction with our services and their concerns about organizational changes that might affect their account management. The audience was completely focused now, and I could see that many women were taking notes on their phones or tablets, recognizing practical strategies they might apply to their own professional challenges. What I discovered was that the client relationships I had built were based on personal trust and professional competence rather than company loyalty. When I left my original firm to join a competitor, all 3 of my major accounts chose to move their business with me, representing nearly 60% of my former department's annual revenue. The woman who had tried to take control of my professional relationships found herself managing an empty portfolio, while I had the opportunity to rebuild my career on a foundation of proven client partnerships and enhanced industry reputation. I paused to let this information sink in, watching as audience members processed the implications of turning professional interference into competitive advantage. But the most important lesson from this experience wasn't about business strategy or client relationship management. It was about the power of refusing to accept other people's definitions of your worth and capability. The betrayal that initially seemed like it might destroy everything I had worked for actually became the catalyst for achievements that exceeded anything I had accomplished while trying to maintain relationships built on compromise and accommodation. The applause that followed this statement was spontaneous and enthusiastic, indicating that the audience connected with the message about personal empowerment and professional resilience. Today, 5 years after that crisis, I serve as CEO of a company that has grown from regional significance to national recognition. We've been honored as one of the most innovative firms in our industry and recognized as an exceptional workplace for professionals who value relationship-based business development. Our success is built on the principle that genuine partnerships create competitive advantages that purely transactional approaches cannot replicate. I gestured toward the screen behind me, which displayed a slide showing Denver Strategic Marketing's growth trajectory over the past 5 years, including revenue increases, geographic expansion, and industry recognition. More importantly, my daughter has grown up watching her mother handle adversity with integrity and strategic thinking. She's learned that strength comes not from avoiding challenges, but from using them as opportunities to discover capabilities you didn't know you possessed. She's seen that the most fulfilling success is built on your own values and vision rather than compromises designed to accommodate other people's limitations. The personal dimension of the story seemed to resonate particularly strongly with the audience, many of whom were probably balancing their own professional ambitions with family responsibilities and relationship challenges. The question I'm most frequently asked about this experience is whether I would recommend the approach I took to other women facing similar circumstances. My answer is that every situation is unique, and what worked for me might not be appropriate for someone else's specific challenges. But I do believe that the principles underlying my response have broader applications for any professional woman dealing with personal crisis or workplace conflict. I moved away from the podium, walking closer to the audience to create a more intimate connection for the final portion of my presentation. First, never let emotion drive strategic decisions. When you're facing betrayal or professional interference, your initial impulse might be to respond with anger or desperation. But the most effective responses come from careful analysis of your actual position, your available resources, and your long-term objective. Take time to understand what you're really dealing with before deciding how to address it. Several audience members were nodding emphatically, clearly recognizing this advice from their own experiences with workplace or personal challenges. Second, invest in relationships that are based on mutual value rather than organizational convenience. Whether we're talking about marriages, friendships, or client partnerships, the relationships that survive external pressures are built on genuine care and consistent delivery of value. Relationships that exist primarily because of proximity or convenience will not provide the foundation you need during difficult periods. I paused, making eye contact with women throughout the audience as I delivered the next point. Third, always have options. The reason I was able to navigate my crisis effectively was that I had spent months quietly exploring alternatives and building financial security. I didn't wait until the situation became desperate to start preparing for different possibilities. Professional and personal resilience requires ongoing attention to your options and your resources. The audience was completely engaged, with many women leaning forward and taking detailed notes on these practical strategies for handling professional and personal challenges. Fourth, focus on building something better rather than just protecting what you have. The most satisfying response to betrayal or interference isn't revenge or even successful defense. It's the construction of a life and career that are stronger than what was threatened. When you focus on improvement rather than just preservation, you often discover opportunities that you wouldn't have pursued if the crisis hadn't forced you to think differently about your possibilities. I returned to the podium for the final portion of my presentation, wanting to end with a message that tied together the practical strategies with the broader themes about personal empowerment and professional growth. The experience I've shared with you today taught me that the most powerful form of success isn't defeating your enemies, but building a life so fulfilling and productive that their interference becomes irrelevant to your continued growth. The people who betrayed me or tried to damage my career have become footnotes in a story that is primarily about discovery, achievement, and the relationships that sustained me through the most challenging period of my life. The applause that followed was sustained and enthusiastic, with many audience members rising to their feet in recognition of both the personal courage and professional insights I had shared. During the question and answer session that followed my presentation, women from the audience asked about specific strategies for handling workplace conflicts, maintaining client relationships during career transitions, and balancing personal crisis with professional responsibility. Their questions demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the challenges facing professional women and genuine interest in applying the principles I had outlined to their own situation. One question that particularly stood out came from a woman in her 30s who identified herself as a marketing director facing interference from a colleague who was trying to take credit for her work and undermine her client relationship. How do you maintain professional composure when someone is actively trying to damage your reputation and steal your achievements? She asked. My answer drew directly from the experience with Rachel Thompson and the strategies that had served me well during that difficult period. The key is to separate your emotional response from your strategic response. Allow yourself to feel angry or hurt in private, but don't let those emotions drive your professional action. Focus on documenting your contributions, strengthening your client relationships, and building support among colleagues who understand your value. The person who is trying to undermine you is usually revealing more about their own insecurities than about your weakness. The conference concluded with networking sessions where I had the opportunity to speak individually with dozens of women who wanted to discuss their own career challenges and strategic plans. Many of them shared stories about workplace betrayals, family crises, or professional setbacks that had forced them to reconsider their assumptions about success and relationships. What struck me most about these conversations was how many accomplished women had experienced some version of the crisis I had faced, and how few of them had felt confident about their ability to navigate those challenges effectively. The strategies that had seemed obvious to me during my own crisis were apparently less intuitive than I had realized, and sharing them provided value that extended far beyond my original experience. That evening, as I drove back to Lakewood through the familiar neighborhoods where Emma and I had rebuilt our lives, I reflected on how completely my perspective on that original crisis had evolved. The betrayal that had once seemed like a catastrophic disruption to my carefully planned life now appeared to have been a necessary catalyst for growth and achievement that wouldn't have occurred under more comfortable circumstances. Emma was waiting for me in the kitchen when I arrived home, her homework spread across the table where David and I had once shared dinners and discussed our days at Pinnacle. She looked up from her calculus assignment with the kind of bright smile that reminded me daily of how much our lives had improved since the divorce. "How was your speech?" she asked, closing her textbook and giving me her full attention. "Really good," I replied, settling into the chair across from her. It felt meaningful to share some of what we've learned with other women who might be facing similar challenges. Emma nodded with the kind of mature understanding that had developed as she watched me build a career and life based on my own values and vision. "Do you think Dad ever regrets what he did?" The question was more direct than she usually asked about David, and I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest without burdening her with adult complexities about regret and consequence. "I think your father understands that his choices led to outcomes he didn't anticipate," I said finally, "but I also think he's learned to accept responsibility for those decisions and to focus on being the best father he can be to you within the current circumstance." Emma nodded thoughtfully, twirling her pencil between her fingers as she processed my response. "I'm glad things worked out the way they did. I mean, I wish he hadn't hurt you, but I like the life we have now." Her observation captured something essential about the transformation our family had undergone. While the crisis had been painful and disruptive, the life we had built afterward was stronger and more authentic than what had existed before David's affair forced us to confront fundamental problems that we had been avoiding. The following week brought news that Rachel Thompson had been hired as vice president of marketing for a technology startup in Austin, Texas, a position that represented significant career advancement and suggested that she had successfully rebuilt her professional reputation after the setbacks she had experienced in Colorado. The information came through industry networks rather than personal communication, but it represented a kind of closure to the professional conflict that had once seemed so threatening to my career. Rachel's success in Texas didn't diminish my own achievements, and I felt no resentment about her ability to recover from the mistakes she had made in Denver. Her interference with my client relationships had ultimately forced me to discover opportunities and capabilities that I might never have developed if she hadn't threatened the comfortable routine I had established at Pinnacle. David's life had stabilized around a more modest set of expectations and responsibilities than he had enjoyed during our marriage, but he had found ways to build meaningful relationships with Emma and to contribute positively to her development and education. His weekend custody had evolved into a consistent routine that provided Emma with regular time with her father while maintaining the stability that came from her primary residence with me. The company I now led had become a model for relationship-based business development, attracting clients who valued long-term partnerships over transactional service arrangements. Our success had created opportunities for dozens of employees who shared our philosophy about the importance of genuine client care and strategic thinking, and our reputation in the industry had attracted speaking opportunities and consulting requests from firms across the country. As I reflected on the 5-year journey from discovering David's betrayal to delivering a keynote address about turning crisis into opportunity, I realized that the most important lesson hadn't been about business strategy or relationship management. It had been about the discovery that your response to betrayal and adversity reveals strengths and capabilities that comfortable circumstances never require you to develop. The woman who had once feared that her husband's affair might destroy everything she had worked for had become a leader whose success was built on her own vision and values, rather than accommodations to other people's limitations. Emma had learned, through observing my response to the most challenging period of our lives, that strength comes not from avoiding difficulties, but from using them as opportunities to discover what you're truly capable of achieving. The marriage that I had thought was unshakable had collapsed because it was built on assumptions, rather than genuine partnership, while the career I had built after the divorce was stronger than anything I had achieved during those years of compromise and accommodation. The client relationships that had survived the transition from Pinnacle to Denver Strategic had done so because they were based on personal trust and professional competence, rather than organizational convenience. My story had become one that I shared not as a template for others to follow, but as evidence that the most powerful response to betrayal is often the patient construction of something better. The success I had achieved was built on the foundation of relationships and values that had proven strong enough to survive external pressures and internal challenges, while the people who had tried to undermine me had become irrelevant to my continued growth and achievement. 5 years after receiving that email about Rachel's promotion, I understood that the most meaningful victories aren't won through revenge or even successful defense, but through the creation of a life so fulfilling and productive that the original crisis becomes a catalyst, rather than a catastrophe. Emma had grown up watching her mother turn the worst betrayal of her life into the foundation for achievements that exceeded anything she had accomplished during the years when she was trying to maintain relationships built on compromise and denial. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.